I'm Leslie Elliott Boyce, and this is The Radical Center, a recording project I began in 2022 as a way to describe and discuss the social and ideological currents that are rapidly altering our culture. In a time when political polarization seems to be the norm, I'm seeking to understand rather than react. I'm grateful to all the thoughtful men and women who share their stories and insights with me in this conversation series. If you would like to contribute to this project financially, there are links in the description. Thank you, and thank you all for listening and being part of this exploration. Hi, today I'm speaking with Dr. Dina McMillan, and Dina McMillan is an internationally recognized social psychologist educated at Stanford University. She has over 20 years of expertise in both community and professional program development, policy improvement, and all levels of training. She specializes in domestic abuse and violence prevention and improved response, bias reduction, and gambling harm. Dr. McMillan excels at simplifying complex concepts and aligning programs with organizational and legislative goals. A globally recognized author, program architect, legal regulator, media-savvy presenter, and podcast host, Dr. McMillan's influence spans diverse domains. As a leading communications expert, she has designed and delivered innovative programs for organizations like the Tennessee Coalition for Domestic Violence, Queensland Government, New South Wales Judicial Commission, and the European Conference on Domestic Violence. Her engaging lectures, seminars, workshops, and keynote speeches, including a popular TED Talk, captivate audiences of all sizes, from intimate groups to packed auditoriums. Dr. McMillan's unique strength lies in bridging academic and legal complexities with practical, accessible solutions tailored to her audience's needs. Her meticulously crafted reference materials enhance her presentations, delivering actionable insights with clarity. Trusted and influential, she is a sought-after voice in her field. And thank you for sitting by while I read your bio. I know it's hard to have that done sometimes, but I wanted to give people a sense of you before we get into a conversation so they know who they're speaking with or listening to. And I'm really delighted to be able to speak with you today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm really excited about this too. Yes.
Yeah. Well, there were so many things that we could have talked about. And when we were messaging prior, you mentioned just a couple of things that were kind of on your mind or have been a focus of your work. And I think we kind of zeroed in on this one, and I'll read the topic as we talked about it back and forth. Relationship difficulties for younger women. And you said, I've noted the cultural messaging directed at younger women sets them up for unhealthy relationships that don't last. They often link up with porn-addicted guys and have to deal with infidelity, laziness, a lack of emotional commitment. I was so bothered that I wrote a book to address this called Fascination with the Devil: Why Women Love Emotionally Dangerous Men. The final chapter is called Ending the Fascination and guides the reader to change her taste. And you also help with tips on how to attract and be attracted to a good man with solid values. That and your work on domestic violence, I am particularly interested in, but honestly, I'm just interested to talk to you about everything. So it's
Oh, thank you. Yes, it's really sad because it's interesting about my book, Fascination with the Devil: Why Women Love Emotionally Dangerous Men. I actually started the premise for that in graduate school. And I put it aside for a while and did other things, including coming up with the world's first and still the only domestic violence prevention program called Unmasking the Abuser. And that's the topic of my TED Talk and also my podcast. Now, I don't only deal with that because I have a show that airs live streams once a week on Daily Cloud and Rumble called Heart and Mind. And we go much broader than just about abusive relationships. But in the years intervening between first putting the research together, doing the interviews and whatever, I went back and started interviewing again. I looked at the research, updated the research, and broadened the scope because it's gotten so bad. I look at the materials that are targeted to young women and the values and beliefs and behaviors that are promoted for them do not lead to healthy, happy relationships. It's hard to find a show where if there's a female in the show where she's not exceedingly foul-mouthed,
Mm-hmm.
really disrespectful to any male in her, that's around her, including her boss.
Mm-hmm.
If she's in a relationship, they always present the woman as being smarter than the man, and the man is always apologizing. So these guys are not masculine at all. So these women are in this dominant position over these guys. Most women lose attraction for men they can dominate. And in fact, I'm even talking about this is a bit of an aside, but recently, over the last few days, I've seen somebody mentioned something, and she did a video where she was talking about problems that she'd had in her marriage, that she was married for 20 years. At the end, she said they worked it out, but she was complaining about the fact that she has to coordinate everything around the family. She is did you see it?
I think I know the one you're talking about. Yeah.
She said she has 4 kids, and she said, my husband is loving and supportive, and asked, what do you need? Mm-hmm. So she told him a few simple things that she needed him to do. But she said, if I don't constantly remind him, it doesn't get done. Mm-hmm. So I have seen this a lot, mm-hmm. where women marry men who become like their additional child.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I know it does seem like there's that mother role that she ends up fulfilling for him as well. Often.
Well, one of the things is, and I made a comment, I hope people, if they look me up on X, if you go to @DrDina1, that's DrDina1, you'll see me on X. And I said, I'll bet Charlie Kirk's wife doesn't have to deal with this. Mm. What happens is when you have men who are constantly chastised for being masculine, for having authority, for being decisive, and instead you go for this really passive guy who's like Barney Rubble in the Flintstones, where he's always waiting for someone else to tell him what to do. Women get bored with that. Mm-hmm. We are naturally attracted to a true alpha male. And now we can have a whole conversation after this about alpha males, because what a lot of people think of as an alpha male isn't. And I actually wrote some material, very useful material, on the different types of males. And I identified a true alpha. And it's not Andrew Tate. Mm-hmm. It's like if you saw the film Gladiator, General Maximus was a true alpha male, and even playing one got him an Oscar. That's the kind of male, and I've seen it happen in real life, where women are with these weak, wimpy guys who often have a secret life that she doesn't know about. They often tend to be passive aggressive. And the women get bored, they're annoyed, and then a true alpha male comes into the room, into their environment, and in spite of themselves, they are very attracted to him. It's a biochemical reaction. So what I want is for women to start being attracted to true alpha males, but here's the caveat. You've got to be a true alpha female. Which means I'm not talking about being this submissive woman who just does what she's told. I'm not talking about being somebody's servant. But an alpha male is not going to be attracted to a woman who's foul-mouthed, domineering, selfish, arrogant, entitled, all of the things that we constantly see in the media. And these women get enormous attention for it. They're the leads in shows and films. But in real life, they make terrible partners. So their relationships don't last. And I don't want that for anybody. I also, you notice I said something about you don't want some weak, wimpy, porn-addicted guy either.
Now, I'm glad you brought up porn because I think that that is a huge part of the rift between men and women right now. And I'm wondering about your perspective on that and what you've researched and found about the contribution of non-monogamous behavior like pornography to the problem in relationships.
In my book, something I had to add in material on this because, as I said, I started it years ago, and porn has become so pervasive and normalized, and mainstream culture has become so pornified. I mean, it's very unusual to watch a show on any of the streaming services where the main characters aren't naked and humping on each other all the time.
Yeah, it's true.
And it's one of the things that happen if you look at research. I mean, you could go back to the research even in like the 70s and 80s. So you look at old research where they showed men over a period of a week, they get a collection of men, try to get a wide cross section, and every day they showed them Playboy magazine pictures. They didn't even get Hustler.
Mm.
So we're talking Playboy magazine. And before they actually experimented on them this way, and I've seen this study replicated again and again and again, before they did the experiment, they actually tested these guys and measured their attraction to their existing partners.
Mm.
And then after 1 week or 2 weeks, exposing them to this Playboy magazine, they measured it again. And the drop in attraction to their partner was significant.
Wow, that's really sad.
And that's only with nudity.
Hmm.
You can imagine what pornography does.
Hmm.
It completely ruins guys. And what happens as well is that the people who produce it want to inspire addiction. So this is where it links to my understanding of gambling harm, because that's another field where they try to get you addicted. And one of the ways they get you addicted, they know that sex with no emotional connection is empty.
Hmm.
So it gets boring after a while. You get adapt to it. At first, it's enticing, but then the same thing over and over again to these strangers you have no connection with, it starts to get a little mundane. So they keep pushing the envelope further and further. And men find, because what it's doing actually, it's conditioning. It's you're brainwashing yourself. So you're finding these pornographers are pushing the envelope further and further to more degrading, more violent acts.
Mm.
And after a while, that's what it takes for these guys to get aroused.
Mm.
So pornography, there is a really good book called Big Porn Inc. And it was edited by Melinda Tankard Reist, R-E-I-S-T. It's Reist or Reist. I'm not sure how you'd pronounce it. But the book is phenomenal because she gathered social scientists from the United States, from Australia, UK, and they all they take a chapter each and talk about the damage that is done by pornography. It is not harmless. It's not something everybody should do. And for men who use pornography, it can absolutely ruin their ability to have a close, loving relationship with a real person. And for women, now women don't use pornography to the same extent, but the same thing can happen with a lot of pornified romance novels. Mm-hmm. I've noticed romance novels have become more pornified. If you watched Outlander.
Mm-hmm. I watched a couple of episodes of it.
I watched a couple of episodes because when it first came out, my mother was completely addicted to romance novels. And when I actually wrote a paper years ago where I went to a used bookstore and just took a random selection of romance novels and read them, and every single one had at least one example of sexual assault or outright rape by the hero of the heroine.
Mm.
And in fact, when I did the paper, I redid the paper a couple of years later, and I actually went and got some stories from survivors, sexual assault survivors. And I asked the reader then, okay, tell me what this is from. Is this a recollection of a sexual assault survivor? Or is this a line? Is this a paragraph out of a romance novel? And often people couldn't tell.
Wow. Wow.
So if I stopped watching Outlander, but I liked Outlander because it had one of the few cases of this non-hypersexual leading man. He was
Mm.
very respectful of her. He was a virgin when they got married. There was an incredible bond that he was never embarrassed about. I just thought it was great. And then I watched the show, and everything I was saying that keeps women from having good relationships is epitomized by the lead.
Mm.
She's foul mouthed, entitled, bossy, aggressive, tells people what to do in a world that is completely different than anything she's experienced.
Mm-hmm.
So she acts like she knows everything all the time. And the way she curses all the time, everything, I'm just like, oh my God. And add in all the rape scenes.
Oh,
I
wow.
was like,
Wow.
almost every episode has a rape or I watched the first season. I couldn't go further than that.
What do you think that's
Eh,
about? That kind of a fantasy about sexual assault. What do you think women are fantasizing about or getting out of that if when they're consuming that kind of material?
I feel like they're being taught that it's a natural part of sexuality. It's
Mm.
if you our brain will normalize whatever we expose it to repeatedly.
Mm.
And I'm looking at this show with this really great characters, and all of a sudden it's turned into this thing where it's unwatchable. I just could not watch this woman. She was horrible. There was nothing not likable about her.
Mm.
And the fact that they constantly had rape, and then they had a whole scene that I read about because I wouldn't watch it anymore, where they're eroticizing him being raped by another man.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, what are you doing? This is aimed at women.
Mm.
So all of the issues, the sexuality issues that men are getting from porn, women are doing to each other through content like this.
Mm.
And it is just ridiculous
Mm.
because a lot of people are like, why are you getting so fussy? It's just fiction because I study the brain, because this is my job. To your brain, there is no such thing as fiction. When you have stories playing out in front of you, whether you're reading them or watching them, to your brain, it's happening in real life. To the subconscious and the unconscious parts of the brain, the parts of the brain that make so many of your life choices, especially very few people choose their mate with the neocortex,
Mm.
with the frontal lobe. We make our choice of partner from the emotions and the primal drives. And if you have trained that part of your brain with this horrible content, that's the kind of person you're going to choose.
Mm.
And
You
I was
know,
really careful. I was careful about that in the book because I
mm.
said, I don't want people to choose a partner just using the rational problem solving part of their brain and they're not attracted to the person. So I actually put
Yeah.
information and exercises in there to help people retrain the emotions and subconscious to want something different.
Mm. That's really fascinating. That is really fascinating. I can see that it wouldn't make sense, like you said, just to choose on the rational basis, because then you end up with a relationship that lacks chemistry, and that intimacy is so important for pair bonding and for continued commitment and connection. And yet, if you have no rational decision making involved in it, then you're right. You're kind of these primal drives. And one of the things that I've been wondering about this quite a lot over the past several years about where are we as Western culture with regard to sexual morality, and where are we going with it? it seems like our culture has lost any sense of valuing discipline in this area of life. Like it's everything goes. Don't, yeah, was the Planned Parenthood thing was don't yuck somebody's yum, which is such a gross phrase to me. Yeah. Don't kink shame. Everything is an orientation. Everything is your, it's your right to explore and nobody should make you feel bad about it. All kinks, all fetishes are on the table. Monogamy is oppressive, polyamory is promoted, these kinds of things. And we've lost this idea that maybe with sex as well as with other areas of life, people benefit from some discipline, from recognizing that there are things that I want to do that I have to curtail. Like maybe I want to eat dessert all day long, but I do have to eat some healthy food and keep dessert in moderation. But with regard to sexuality, that's just out the window right now. And, how do we make sense of sexual morality in this modern culture?
We don't apologize for taking our world back. And it started with the 60s. If it feels good, do it. And people are going to be shocked. It started with this broad acceptance of homosexuality. If you look at most cultures over most periods of time, they have not accepted homosexuality, and there was a reason for that. I worked for years in the LGBT community, and people are like, well, you don't know anybody in that community. Oh, please. I worked as the agony aunt for a gay men's magazine, and I talked about relationships on a callback on a gay and lesbian radio station. I had a call-in show on a gay and lesbian radio station. I was very immersed in the community. I got to see it firsthand. So I got to see both the research, which stopped being done and around 2008, 2009. You couldn't do rigorous research on gay communities and gay relationships anymore.
Because it became politically
it always had to be. It's just like with the whole thing about gender ideology, where they have this model where it has to be the affirmation model.
Yeah.
You had the same thing with gay relationships. And what I saw was a community full of people who had unresolved trauma and cluster B personality disorders. The vast majority of gay men were molested before they were old enough to give legal consent. Same for the women. And I'm looking at this and I'm looking at the relationships they have. And I'm looking at society. Let's just stand back objectively, though. We reproduce by having men and women have sex with each other. And because our children stay vulnerable so long, they have so many algorithms that show children do best if they have parents who are married to each other who help raise them the whole time. Having two moms and two dads does not replicate that. And so everybody's now forced to pretend. You're forced to pretend. You're forced to ignore the promiscuity and depravity that is such a huge part of life in the gay community, especially for the guys, is unlike anything I'd ever seen. And you're supposed to pretend that's okay. The women are often running from something. They're scared, It's the men and women aren't the same. It's the same with gender ideology. If you look at the type of person who is a trans-identified male, it's often more cases than not, he's a heterosexual with a fetish that he gained through porn. With the women, they're on the autism spectrum and are usually abuse survivors. So it's not the same for both sexes. And I'm not talking about I don't have an either or mindset. It's not about, we need to persecute people for being gay. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying it is not the same. It is not as healthy for society as having heterosexual relationships. And we have allowed people to convince us that promiscuity homosexuality, polyamory, all kinds of strange fetishes gained from porn. All of this is all equal.
Mhm.
And there's just no way. And you'll notice, I mean, like, look at all these baby drag queens. So you have these little boys that are being brought up to do sexualized drag queen dances in rooms full of
Full of
men
adults.
throwing
Yeah.
money at them.
Yeah.
And if straight guys did that, if you had a little girl doing that, everybody
Oh
would be up in
gosh.
arms.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was like a willful blindness where anything happened with the gay community.
Mhm.
And I run into trouble because I don't have blindness about anything.
Mhm.
You know, I'm looking at everything and going, this is a problem. This is disturbing. I've found only a small percentage of people that I've come across that I think were actually naturally homosexual.
Mhm.
A lot of people, it is a response to something that happened in their lives during the formative years where their sexual map was distorted by being molested by somebody.
So given that
Because
some people will be naturally homosexual, how does a healthy society navigate that? How does a healthy society support their right to live their life and love who they love while also not pretending that children raised by homosexual couples have everything that children raised by heterosexual couples have in terms of mother, father, that you can take out one parent, insert new person, and have the same benefits to the child. So how do you manage that? Do you have thoughts about it?
by being really frank about it, you know,
Mhm.
you don't have to persecute people, but you don't pretend. What has happened is we have been so weak. We've taken the non-persecution edict and turned it into willful blindness and pretending. And then people who want everybody to allow them to just get away with everything have just said, hey, look how weak they are. We can do everything now.
Mhm.
So you can say no. You can say that's not okay.
Mhm.
Um, I see this all the time. I'm so sick of people pretending. As I said, and you notice I keep bringing in things like if it feels good, do it, and the polyamory. So I'm not just picking on one thing.
Mhm.
Sexually, once don't, you take the emotion away from sexuality,
Mhm.
you start to lose something very important. And here's where the vulnerability came in. In a patriarchal society, they intentionally removed that emotional bond for men.
Mhm.
So they encouraged promiscuity for men because it meant when they married, they weren't as attached to their wives as they would be if both of them were sexually exclusive and had only been with each other. Now, I'm not saying we go to the point where everybody has to be a virgin when they get married. Again, I don't see an either or, but I also think people should be far more particular about whom they share their sexuality with. And it shouldn't be a part of every relationship. I mean, one of the things in my book, I talk about the fact, you know, if you're getting to know somebody, see them in the daytime. Don't have, don't let them have a sexual expectation. Treat your body and your sexuality as if it's extremely valuable because it is. And if he is what my sister would jokingly call a man hoe, he's not compatible with you because you won't be able to trust him. But, you know, if you look at Victorian society, for instance, they were so restrictive. Or if you look at certain cultures right now, so restrictive on the women, and then the men can just do anything. You
Which kind
know,
of
that,
leads you to this idea of what I think of as the sacrificial slut. It's like some women for women who are marriageable, there's this set of expectations. But if men can be as promiscuous as they would like to be, they're doing that with someone. And so that means that there's a portion of women who are just excluded from the norms for women of their society. They're deemed something else. And so that would be kind of the sacrificial slut. These are the women who are for sex. And these are the women who are for marriage.
And everybody loses. And it's one of the reasons that women were frustrated enough that when the opportunity for the feminist movement came along, they grabbed it because the imbalance was extreme. And of course, men recognized that if the woman was very particular with her sexuality, that her sexuality was tied into her emotions, and they wanted that, but they didn't want to give it back. And having these skewed relationships has always led to disaster, always. So you see things like, you watch any of the films, like let's take bachelor parties, for instance.
Okay.
Why are those okay? Where they have strippers and prostitutes, and not only are they encouraging this guy who's about to get married to cheat on his fiance, most of the guys that are there are in relationships, and they're cheating too. And women are supposed to just turn away, say boys will be boys. No, that's not it. If we want a society that will be strong and healthy, we will encourage partners to bond to each other. And with regard to what I said before about the percentage of people who are naturally gay, they will have the same kind of relationships. We won't accept, rampant promiscuity and depravity from anybody. No blinders. Because the more you look, the more you examine, the more you know, you realize how society loses from that.
Well, and I can see how, when you say that, it's like the problem isn't necessarily the homosexuality. It's the behaviors that are being dismissed. It's almost like an infantilization of the gay individual in this scenario. Like, you aren't expected to have the restraint that would be expected of someone else.
But it also does change things. For instance, one thing that a lot of the trans-identifying males have tried to say is, well, if you don't want us to be in women's safe spaces, what about lesbians? I probably know more gay and lesbian people than most people because of the jobs that I've had. I have never met lesbians that go around recording people under the stalls or do creepy things in bathrooms. Never. And I mean, we're talking about 3 continents. I've never met lesbians that act like that. So it is not the same as some guy who has a fetish for being a woman and is stealing pads and tampons and is masturbating in the stall because he has a urine fetish. And these guys, a lot of them are absolutely disgusting. So no, it isn't the same at all. However, I will say this: if you have a group that's same sex, there's something wonderful about a same sex group, whether it's male or female. There's kind of energy that goes when you're all women or you're all men, and there's an openness. But that changes if anybody in that group is sexually attracted to the people in the group. It changes the energy. You lose some of that. Some of the ease is gone. And even me saying this, a lot of your audience probably never heard anybody talk about it because you weren't allowed to.
Because you're not allowed to, yeah.
You're not allowed to admit what's going on with regard to homosexuality. Is supposed to be something that's not just accepted, but promoted. And that's ridiculous. There is a cost. There is a cost. So if somebody is naturally that way, I don't want them to be persecuted, but I don't want it to be promoted either, because society does not benefit from having a large proportion of its population, especially some of its most creative and bright, who never marry a person of the opposite sex and raise children together.
Mhm.
So it's not something you want to promote. And but you're never allowed to even look at that. And it's the same, so
Yeah,
many things. And I know I'm shocking people because most people just never talk about it. It's like, you're not allowed to look at that. You're not allowed to say that.
right. Right. It's a massive taboo. And it's interesting what you were saying about uh I can't remember the word you used, but the difference between basically tolerance and promotion, that jump.
Mm-hmm.
So I can remember a conversation I had with a friend several years back. This would be, well, maybe even close to 10 years ago. A good friend of mine was a lesbian, married and raising a child, and a very loving family, a very happy kid, nice home. I mean, this was a good family. And so that's an example that I've seen of it working pretty well under the circumstances. Of course, there's an absent person in that picture who's the father of the child who, I won't get into any more detail because these are friends, but I had a conversation with my very good friend about tolerance versus acceptance versus celebration. And she was very much on this. The tolerance was not okay. Tolerance was not an okay thing when it came to sexual identity, homosexuality, even transgender. It had to be something above tolerance because mere tolerance is it in it has implicit in it a disapproval, but an allowance for something that is disapproved. So one must have the experience of full approval of all of these other identities. And so we were having kind of a debate about that, and we had to agree to disagree. But it is interesting to me. Like we went from, I believe, and I heard somebody talking about this recently, and I haven't checked it, but it seems right in my memory that even when Obama was campaigning the first time, he was not campaigning for approval of gay marriage. He was only saying we should allow civil unions. So this was just a few years ago, really. I mean, this is what, 15, uh, 18 years ago, something like that. We've gone all the way from the most progressive wing of American political society saying we should stop short of gay marriage, but allow civil unions because of these issues of like visiting a loved one in the hospital, et cetera, inheritance, things like this, all the way to we promote it in schools. Now, schools push kids to be LGBTQ plus. Schools are actually selling this really hard to children.
And media too.
And media too, yeah.
I was watching Glee
Mm.
because my nieces liked it. And I turned on the episode and they showed two cheerleaders in bed kissing each other.
Oh, okay.
And I'm looking at this and going, but see, this is why I'm a little bit of a hard nut as it goes, because I'm a social psychologist. So I realize how many things that go to an extreme could have been prevented if you stopped it early.
Mm.
So I never would have approved civil unions for gay couples. I would have found another way to legally put somebody on a list that if something happens to you, they can be the person you call, they can be the person you inherit. I would not have done it because we didn't have enough discussion about all the implications of how that would change things for society. Because marriage has never just been about the couple themselves or their family.
Mm-hmm.
It's a social thing. And we never got to discuss it. By the time the marriage thing came about, there was so much censorship regarding disapproval that a lot of people did not feel free to say how they really felt. Or, I mean, I know, as again, having lived immersed in the community, I know very few couples, gay and lesbian couples, where one of the people in the couple doesn't absolutely despise the opposite sex.
Mm.
Now you look at these kids that you said they had an okay family. Well, groups of women have always raised children.
Mm-hmm.
But if you do an algorithm on who comes out better, who comes out more healthy, who comes out the most successful, you would not find same-sex couples. And in fact, here's another separation. The data that they have on how kids do is terrible methodology, self-selection bias, and it's for one of the few times the gay guys push the lesbians out front.
Oh, interesting.
Because groups of women have always raised children, there are fewer things going on. And add to the fact that with the males, not only do they not have a mother, who is the most important person for a child's early years is the mom. Dads count. Absolutely, dads count. But number one is mom. So you take the mom away, you're actually depriving that child of something important. And then you got to look at your friends. How many of your friends are actually attracted to kids? Nobody talks about this. And I'm not saying it's everybody. God knows, because I know so many people. I know people that scan the spectrum as far as mental health, as far as relationships, as everything. But I am very wary of anything when you're talking about a broad social change and you're stifling people from examining it closely before they make a decision. You're telling them they're a bigot unless they celebrate this, unless they allow these people to take over their schools. That flag, I was telling people in the community about that flag from the beginning. I said, the rainbow represents, for Jews and Christians, it represents God's promise. It is a symbol you see in every kid's bedroom and on their books and everything, because it's how they learn their colors. So you're taking something that represents Judeo-Christian thought plus children and using that as your flag. It's insulting. Are you aware of how insulting this is? It's manipulative. Because kids see a rainbow and they think, oh, this is like the stuff that I have. So much. If you have something that's genuine and right, it will bear up under scrutiny. You do not need to censor people from looking at it closely. And we never got that chance. By the time any vote came about for gay marriage or whatever, and in fact, they passed the gay marriage laws in the States when the majority of Americans did not want it. They did it anyway.
It does seem like we've treated this issue like other issues that we could talk about, but this one in particular has been treated as a false dichotomy. It's like either you're all for, and then you're a good person and you're inclusive and tolerant and loving and yada yada, or you're all against and you're a bigot and you're a homophobe and all the others. So
That's
there's not that
blame.
rational middle. Yeah.
No.
This is one of those places where you're blocked from having a compassionate dialogue about what's actually best for human flourishing.
Absolutely. And the use of homophobe. I don't buy into it. See, that I do have the advantage of having that doctorate. So I was like, unless you're a mental health professional, don't phobia me about anything. Because it was used to weaponize even asking questions. It was used to weaponize looking at it and going, well, wait a minute, that doesn't seem right. That doesn't seem healthy. That doesn't seem something I want to replicate in my own family. Having the parades and things called pride. Pride is one of the 7 deadly sins. So everything you're doing is manipulative and negative, and nobody's supposed to notice or comment on it. We're taking our world back. And as again, I'm going to have to repeat this for the people in the back that are mad at me now. I am not advocating persecution. But I am saying that in a healthy society, heterosexual relationships result in children for a reason.
Mhm.
And we have such vulnerable children that it takes decades before they're able to go out on their own. So unlike animals whose children after a year are perfectly capable of surviving on their own, we need both. And it's the same thing, but it didn't start there. Again, like I said, if it feels good, do it. Also, single parenthood.
Mhm.
This advocacy of single parenthood, of having all the talk show hosts and people like, I come from a single parent family and it didn't hurt me. Oh, please. They can do an algorithm that would show how differently you turn out
Mhm.
if you had both parents in the home. I am divorced and I know it cost my daughter. I know it did. And her dad and I, when she was a kid, we worked really hard, never to say bad things about each other, not to put her in the middle. Every school holiday, they were off around the world going on a trip, and it still cost her.
Mhm.
So one of the things I saw, because I could not stay married to him, what I said was to myself, once I became a social psychologist, I need to make marriage smarter
Mhm.
so that people don't end up getting divorced. Because if you have children, it hurts them.
Mhm.
Just because you can't see it or won't acknowledge it doesn't mean it's not there. So much that is negative in our society, people have been taught to pretend they don't see it. And that's another, and you notice I mentioned that I'm divorced. So I am not just pointing fingers at people. I'm looking at choices I've made and said, oh my God, that was such a bad choice. That was a mistake.
Mhm.
And we
Yeah.
need to do better because society, I mean, I remember when I was in grad school and you had to work as a TA, you had to be a teacher's assistant to the professors. And one of the professors asked the students, because I was at Stanford, and Stanford's the hardest university in America to get into. It's even harder to get out of if you're in grad school, believe you me. But he asked, how many people here have parents that are married to each other? All but two kids in a class of about 45 raised their hands.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah. So while people try to tell themselves, but you see, again, we can't fix it if we can't look at it.
Mhm.
So, how do you mitigate some of those negative impacts of not having married parents? You've got to look at it and say, okay, what can we do? And it's like the Black community. Don't get me started. I've been talking about the Black community and the toxic culture in the Black community and how we need to do something about it. But most Black people would just call me a traitor and say I have internalized white supremacy and completely ignore the fact that our outcomes are really bad.
Mhm.
Schools in our communities are not educating our children. I see all these videos online of people taking videos of their kids being able to twerk when they're 3, but they
Mhm.
can't read. There are so many toxic aspects of the Black community. Everybody talking about we deserve restitution. Here's the restitution. Fund a group of us to figure out how to change the culture.
Mhm.
We change the culture, we'll change the outcomes.
Mhm.
But we have to be able to talk about it.
Yeah.
So we have to get rid of that. One of the things that the Trump era is ushering in is fact-based analysis, even if it's uncomfortable.
Well, it's like that in an individual and in a relationship and at the larger scale too, that if there's something that you won't look at because it's uncomfortable to look at, then you're really not able to make intentional decisions around, if this is a major part of your life, you need to know what it is. Knowing what it is doesn't mean that you have to act in a certain way about it, but you have to be able to assess it and take stock of it. And that silencing of discourse, especially throughout academia, has been so shocking to me because when my earlier experiences of college were like, you can talk about anything. It's a place for broad discussion. It's a place where you do talk. If it's an uncomfortable thing, especially go there because that's where something interesting is. And it seems like that is completely changed. So the uncomfortable areas are the areas that we just create black and white thinking around, and it's all or it's nothing.
And self-assessment is discouraged. I know that in Fascination with the Devil, my book Fascination with the Devil, I did something that I rarely do. I usually don't talk about myself very much. I usually talk about the issue at hand. I don't talk about myself, but I start the book off talking about me falling in love with this absolute numpty when I knew better. So, because I didn't want the women reading it, because I actually go through mindsets you have, beliefs that you have that will set you up to get into bad relationships. And I didn't want the women reading it to feel judged, like I was coming from this place where I thought I was superior.
Mm.
So I absolutely laid it all out there. I was like, oh my God, what was I thinking? Had I lost my ever loving mind? You know, but we go through just a list of things, and you can and take little tests on how do you feel when this happens? What do you think? Because the whole goal of the book is not to judge anybody. It's to assess what you're doing wrong, why you're not attracting and keeping those great guys, and how you can change it so that's the kind of guy you really want. Because I'm not helping you if I help you get involved with a guy who ticks all the boxes and bores you to tears. You've got to be attracted to that. You've got to want that. You have to cherish that. So that's what I did. But as I said, I entered it in there. It's like me being divorced. So when I say, and talking about Black culture, I'm a Black woman. When I say we need to assess everything and figure out where we're going right and where we're going wrong, I don't just mean other people's groups. I mean every group to which I belong as well. But I saw what happened with the LGBT community, and it was a travesty. We need to really start over there. And T doesn't belong with the rest. I don't see any benefit, and I've tried, and I've been working with the community for a long time. I don't see any benefit of transgenderism to the individual or to the broader community. I see no benefit. It's all cost.
I saw a video today of a woman who was she said, I'm an older lesbian, and maybe you caught this too. It kind of was big on Twitter. Yeah, and she says that the TQ plus does not belong with the LGB, and that it was really all designed to groom us into accepting pedophilia. And I wonder about that. I've heard other people make that statement. I don't see. I'm wondering if maybe if you agree with this, if you could draw that line for me, because it doesn't seem like it's necessarily it has to follow from that. Although there are some aspects of this, like you talked about the kid drag queens, and certainly all the conversations that public schools and the media are having with little children about sex and sexuality seems like it kind of goes in that direction. But I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
It is not the T that's causing that. It is the LGB as well. Those baby drag queens are not dancing in front of transgenders. They're dancing in front of gay males. The pornography that they're putting in school libraries is gay porn. It has nothing to do with transgenderism. There is an aspect of the gay community. I mean, did you ever watch that show called Shameless? Somebody was talking about it. So I watched some episodes. It was, knowing how I think, you can imagine how painful it was. But they have a young guy on there who is gay. They show him at the underage having an affair with a married man. And nobody ever says, oh my God, this is really wrong. They have him working underage again at a bar where he's giving blowjobs to the gay guys in the parking lot for money. And nobody says, oh my God, we need to call the police. That's horrible.
Yeah.
So not disapproving is tacit approval.
Mm.
And what happened is she sees it with the T, but I see it with that whole group of letters,
Mhm.
where what happened is people were conditioned through being called names, just like anytime you say something about what's going on in the Black community, it's not fixing itself because you're a bigot, you're a racist, and people back down, right?
Mhm.
They did the same thing with the gay community. So very quickly, by the early 2000s, you were not allowed to acknowledge any of the issues, social, cultural, individual, you were seeing with gay community, the advocacy of homosexuality, all of it. You were not allowed to say anything. And one of the things that has always been an aspect of it is underage boys. And it's funny because even Joe Rogan was saying, well, you know, a lot of my gay friends said that they were mentored by an older gay guy and he's like nodding along with this. And I'm like, do you realize that's called grooming?
Mhm.
I mean, you get a young guy, 12, 13 years old, 14 years old, they're excited, sexually excited by lawn furniture. Okay.
Mhm.
So you teach them, and of course, and Oprah even mentioned this because she was molested at 13. She said, they always tell you that you wanted it. And if they are able to get you to be aroused, then you buy that as well.
Mhm.
And the way the brain works is it will do whatever it can to keep functioning. It's why people are like, how can someone stay in an abusive relationship and still continue? Because the brain will jump through hoops to keep functioning. So if you were molested, the chances are good a part of your brain will normalize that.
Mhm.
That's why when they've done studies, they found more than 90% of strippers and prostitutes were molested before they were
Mm.
sexually mature. Their brain normalized being used, sexually used. Same thing. If you are molested, some people will repress it, some people will get angry, and some people will normalize it. That doesn't make it right.
Mhm.
So when I was talking about people who are just born that way and the tolerance would include not preying upon underage people. We have to protect our children, regardless of your sexual orientation. And what happened is very quickly, lack of persecution of homosexuality became advocation of homosexuality and willful blindness of all of the things that are going on in those communities that are problematic.
Mhm.
And where sexuality is concerned in our society, just about every community is problematic. I mean, the same thing with porn. Porn's not okay. Pornifying all of our content isn't okay. Again, I've mentioned the Black community. I mean, there is a lot that's an issue in our community, but we can't fix things unless everybody knows we are going to be scrutinized. And if we want people to accept whatever we're presenting, we have to provide evidence that has to bear up under scrutiny. We can't call them names. We can't call them bigot, phobic, or anything else, you know, these weaponized words, calling people fascist and Nazi. And this is how they get people to back down and not look closely. And so, and every time that happens, the predators among the group and the predators of every race, creed, color, and sexual orientation. Okay, the predators see that as an easy way to push the boundaries even further.
Mhm. So, one thing I'm kind of wondering with your work on domestic violence, I see sort of a similar pattern happening on the broader scale with some of these movements that are emotion driven, pushing things into the black and white territory of splitting things into if you question this, you're a bigot. And this reminds me a lot of an abusive situation within a smaller group, like a husband and wife or a couple. Um, how in that situation, the individual who's being abused thinks that there's a way to often thinks that there's a way to get through to this other person. There's a way
Mhm.
to maybe there's a way to speak rationally and convince them to stop doing the things that they are doing that are harmful. And a lot of times that's just not possible because you're not going to get that person's permission to live normally and forego this pattern that's been developing in the relationship. And similarly, I don't think that those of us who are trying to advocate for nuanced, sober exploration of these topics are going to get the permission of the people who are shouting bigot,
No.
racist, transphobe, homophobe at us.
Ah,
I don't think we're going to get their permission to uh, put this back in order in a way that, like when you said we're taking our world back, which I really like, and I'm curious about the roadmap for that. But how do we move forward? How do we discover and decide and realize that we're not going to talk sense into the radicals who are
no, we're
very,
not.
very loud and move forward anyway with something that puts things back in a better order for human uh, human living and families and something that resembles a functioning society.
Well, one thing you have to develop a thick skin so you don't back down to the bullies.
Mhm.
And one of the things, it was interesting because of the Icons conference in July 2023 in Denver, I was invited to speak because somebody in the administration of Icons, which is about protecting girls and women's sports, somebody watched my TED talk and said, I see parallels between what you're talking about with regard to grooming someone to accept an abusive relationship and what's being done to our girls and young women to get them to remove all boundaries and always concede whenever a man asks for something. And they said, what we're worried about, and they went one step further, which was really clever. They said, are we conditioning these girls to be future abuse victims?
Mhm.
And I said, yes, absolutely. Because when you teach someone this is what's been going on, as I said, since the 60s with all different types of groups. It's not just, I know we talked about the LGBT, but it's not just them or only them, or they're not even the prominent ones. When you're talking about how our sexuality and our relationships and our family structure has been absolutely blown up, what they do is they get you to not question. They bully you if you say no. They teach you you're a bad person if you even ask questions, let alone have boundaries. But you get to decide whether you're going to go along with that or not. And what we have is more people now who are saying no. Again, for me, if we're going to have these different groups, I even have a program, an anti-bias program of how to get people to work together who are very different in their views. But if you have an extreme radical that it's my way or the highway, that person has to be excluded because they can't work with anybody else. Because all they know how to do is bully. I'm talking about reasonable people that say, can we agree to disagree? That you have this lifestyle, maybe, you have barbecues every weekend, or maybe you like the Dallas Cowboys and I don't, or, you have things that you do and I don't, and let's talk about other things. Let's agree to disagree. We need to get to that place, but we also need to stop allowing ourselves to be abused because once you've seen it, once we allowed it in one area, it just kept getting progressively worse. Our family structures are being destroyed broadly across the map because when it first started happening, people who benefited from the destruction bullied everybody else into either being quiet or telling them, convincing them you're a good person if you accept this. And say, hey, it's the same to have a single parent household as to have. So you get social points, you get virtue signaling points for advocating for this. but it was an abusive relationship. And anybody who's ever been in an abusive relationship knows you can never really win.
Mhm.
There's always that next thing that they're going to demand. And everything they demand always gets harder and harder to concede to. You know, it's funny because when I first did my interview with Naomi Wolf, who ended up asking me, that's how I got the show on Daily Cloud. She owns Daily Cloud, but she interviewed me, and the topic was the COVID era an abuser?
Mhm.
So she was looking at all of the things that were done to people who asked questions or had evidence that the direction we were taking wasn't the right one. How we were treated. And she saw it as abusive. And she was absolutely right. But you'll notice something. The people who conceded to that, in a lot of places, you look at Canada, you look at Australia, look at New Zealand, they had the vast majority of their population conceded to the absolute bullying maneuvers of COVID. And now they're losing everything else because the bullies realized we can just push these people and say, you're a good person if you give me what I want with no questions. So now that they're losing all freedom of thought, freedom of speech, they're just, you know, they have a look at the UK. UK has such a two-tiered. They actually made a law that white British people would get harsher sentences if they committed a crime than ethnic minorities.
Wow. That's
If
insanity.
you don't stand up to bullies, no yes is ever sufficient. It just keeps going. And once you give into it in one area, it conditions you to be like that. You've already developed the skills, the willful blindness,
It's a
the
manipulation
rational.
skill. It's the same in sales. They'll try to get you in on one little thing, knowing that if they can close that small offer, they're much more likely to close on the larger offer.
It's called foot in the door technique. And again,
Mhm.
that's social psychology. This is one of the reasons I've said when it comes to a lot of these things right now, one of my goals is to roll out my Unmasking the Abuser program nationally because no one, we talked about this before the show, that no one, Democrat or Republican, has ever reduced the risk for women about getting involved in an abusive relationship. And the risk for men is actually increasing, but it's still nowhere near as high as it is for women.
Mhm.
For women, it's approximately 25%. And in states like Oklahoma, it's
Oh my
49.1%.
gosh. Wow.
I have a program that I've actually tested out that's well researched that actually works without turning you into somebody that thinks everybody's trying to abuse you. It's not anti-male because a lot of times when you have things that are supposed to protect women, they think we can protect women by being hateful towards men.
Mhm.
No, it's not going to get you to be hateful towards men, but it will show you manipulation tactics. And once you know those, you can spot them whether the person is coming at you romantically, whether it's a workplace, whether it's a social movement, whether it's a government ideology. You can spot these tactics because there aren't that many of them. I've been able to teach this program to 13-year-olds.
Mm.
And one of the 13-year-olds that I taught, she was really interesting because I had a seminar, a workshop called Protect Your Daughters.
Mhm.
Somebody always says, oh, you need to teach this to kids. Well, kids don't necessarily have the mind skills, the flexibility. They still have black and white thinking. They don't have the executive thinking that comes later. I said, sure, I'm willing to teach kids 13 and above, but they have to bring every generation of women in their family. So it was
Oh.
women only. Because if you're not all on the same page, so many women have come to me and said, we took your training, we know how to spot the bad guys, but everybody in my family, all my girlfriends are trying to encourage me to go with this guy saying I'm too picky because they don't get what I'm picking up because you taught me this.
Mhm.
So I want to get this out there because we spend over $9 billion a year in direct costs for domestic violence. And while the Department of Government Efficiency is trying to save money, here's a way to save money, save lives, save the next generation. And 13-year-olds, now this 13-year-old that came, she came under duress. And initially she sat there with her arms crossed and with teenager face, the eyes kind of like this.
Yeah.
By halfway through, she was sitting up straight. By 3/4 of the way through, she was leaning forward.
No.
And she wrote, by the time I got home, I checked my email. She had already written an extremely supportive and emotional email about, she was furious. Why hasn't anyone taught us this before? And she CC'd the mayor.
Wow.
And the mayor said, we're going to give you more funding to do more training. So what I'm talking, because, they say, they accredit it to Einstein, whether he said it or not, that if you can't explain it simply, you don't know it well enough. So I've been able to identify the specific tactics. We talked about the foot in the door technique. If you can get somebody to make a small concession, you can get a larger one. I took the specific tactics used by abusive partners in order to lure people in and trap them in a relationship, and made it easy to understand all different ways to understand, so that people can spot this early and not get involved, because these guys move fast. And once you get involved with them, they know all sorts of psychological tricks to keep you from walking away. So I want people to be able to spot this early. Or if you are in a relationship, I've had a lot of people come to me and say, I read your book, but he says he loves me. And I realized I was right. Because my husband didn't hit me, I didn't know I was in an abusive relationship. But reading your book, I actually saw exactly what was going on. So, and again, I'm not trying, my aim isn't to break up people's marriages. It's to get people to have loving, mutually respectful, healthy relationships. But we need right now in the US, we need a win where women are concerned. Because the biggest criticism I get from anti-Trumpers is that the Trump administration isn't doing enough to help women. Well, here's something to help women that nobody else has ever dared to do. Let's lower the risk of women getting trapped in abusive relationships without turning them into misandrists where they hate men.
I think that seems like an incredibly valuable training to offer. And you're touching on something that's so important there, because there's such suspicion between women and men right now. You see it online. I don't know how bad it is in person, but I suspect it's quite bad. There is a pretty good portion of women and a pretty good portion of men who've just been turned away from each other. And so getting something that can help people to maximize their chances of having successful relationships, and also teach them how to conduct themselves so that they are someone that can offer a good relationship to another person, both women and men. As you kind of talked about those media archetypes of this rough, tough girl who's really domineering. And I've seen that too. And I've thought it's almost as if we're going to use all of the male stereotypes for personality, but we're going to package them in a sexy woman's body. And that's the emblem of femininity that we're being presented from the entertainment industry so often. And the same for men. They've been really, like you said, there's this real push against masculinity, which means that men feel diminished and they feel like they're not respected and not wanted. And that's a huge problem too, because then they don't get a healthy role model for what does strong masculine behavior really look like.
Well, also too, in my book and in my work, one of the things I talk about is that, it takes a long time to braid my hair like this. Okay, so I spend a lot of time in the hair shop. Okay, and even before I got braids, when you go to the hair shop, it takes a while.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed over the years that women could play out and would talk in detail about every wrong thing their current or former partner did,
Mm-hmm.
but nobody ever talked about what they did wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So in my work and in my book, I talk about here's some mindsets you can have, here's some things that you can do that will actually cause a problem in your relationship. Here's an easy way of changing that,
Mm-hmm.
because it's not one-sided. If you're going to get this fantastic partner, you need to be a fantastic
Mm-hmm.
partner, or anybody with confidence will walk away. So everybody wins when we have stronger relationships and stronger families, which is why I had a job in the LGBT community. I was like, everybody needs a healthy relationship. If you're going to be in a relationship, it needs to be healthy.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the problems of everybody just putting an okay on everything you do is that when you're doing really bad things that are self-destructive and others destructive, nobody tells you.
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to have a healthy relationship that way?
Mm-hmm.
So, and again, but we can fix this. I never talk about a problem without also offering a realistic solution.
Mm-hmm.
We can fix a lot of this, and it's not even that hard. The fact that I can teach my Unmasking the Abuser program to 13-year-olds tells you it's not that complicated.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to learn it, and you have to pay attention when you see it. Don't talk yourself out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things I encourage too, if groups of people learn the information, and every time you meet somebody new, talk about the new person, because when you're attracted to someone, you may be willing to overlook things that may be a serious problem. And that's
Right.
also why I wrote an ebook called Simple. It's just an overview of abusers, a brief overview of abusers' strategies and tactics. All this stuff's on my website. You can find it. But it's a $10 book that describes how they trick you into getting involved with them, all the little tricks they use at the very beginning to lure you in. And then it gives you the definition of all the different tactics, so that you can have it on hand. So you meet somebody, you go out on a date, you're like, did I see any of this? You can just go to the ebook, and I would suggest printing it out, because our brain actually processes information differently when we see it online or versus when we actually have it physically.
In print, yeah.
In print, printed material actually counts. So I would suggest printing it out. It's less than 60 pages. I made it short. But you look it up and you say, okay, did I see any of this? And you don't lie to yourself. You tell yourself, I'm not going to lie to myself. And if you do see something, you don't necessarily say, I'm never going to talk to this guy again. You just investigate a little further. And I would also suggest not collapsing yourself into a relationship until you get to know who you're dealing with. So many women are willing to get so involved. They meet a guy they're attracted to. I have a friend. Oh, I was in love. He came to visit me, and we met online, and he came to see me, and I was in love before his luggage came down. I'm like, oh my God. I have one friend that has the worst taste of anybody I've ever met in my whole life. So she's like my really bad example.
Yeah.
But remain wary until you know who you're dealing with. But also, fix yourself. Here's some advice. While you're waiting to meet the ideal partner, do as much as you can on yourself, so that you're just like an amazing, because the best thing to be is a hard act to follow.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's fantastic advice. I'd love to get into the concrete ideas that you present if you ever want to share them. I know it's kind of it's your practical material, and it's way
out in the world.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'd love that if you want to maybe have a part 2 discussion and get into some of those specifics, because I'm really eager to hear.
Because the brief overview was designed to be short, As I said, it's less than 60 pages and has pictures on every page. I designed this to be like a magazine article.
Oh, it sounds fun to read too.
We could actually go through it, and I can
Okay.
show you things
Oh my
like
gosh.
very helpful, how a guy who wants to get involved with you and you're not attracted to him, he'll start doing things for you when he knows you're overwhelmed to try to worm his way into your life. And I can show you the different things. We can just go through it and we can have a lot of fun with it.
Hmm.
And the more places you hear it and see it, the more you'll remember it when you
Hmm.
come across it in real life.
Hmm.
So
Oh,
yeah,
it sounds
let's do
wonderful.
that.
Yeah, I'd love it. And meanwhile, I'll put all the links to places where people can find you and your work in the description of this video. But if you don't mind, also tell people out loud so that if they're just listening, they can go and search you up.
Well, if you go to Daily Cloud or go to Rumble and look up Heart and Mind with Dr. Dina McMillan, you will find my show. If you go on any podcast platform and look up Unmasking the Abuser, you'll find my podcast. If you go to my website, www.drdinamcmillan, all one word, DRDINA, drdinamcmillan.com, you'll find all of my books, videos, all sorts of blogs, all sorts of things. And you can send me contact information and ask me questions. And my show is on every Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And it's broadcast live on X. It's on the Daily Clout page on Facebook. It's on Rumble. It's on Getter. Um, so, and Daily Clout. So, and I like last week's show, I actually just saved it and put it on my feed, my X feed. So if you go at Dr. Dina 1 on X, you'll find me and you'll see some of my shows.
Well, Dina, I appreciate your calm and compassionate but truth-focused exploration of topics that are hard for people to talk about. And it is really hard for people to talk about sex and relationships and what is healthy and what is ideal right now in a time when we are just programmed to be open and tolerant to everything. So I really appreciate this conversation. It's been very interesting for me and a delight to talk with you, and I look forward to doing it again.
Oh, yes, let's do number two. And also, in the meantime, people can contact me anywhere. If there's any specific area you want us to cover, let me
Oh yeah.
know
Yeah,
so we can cover
absolutely.
that then.
And comment in the video description here on I'll put this up on YouTube. So comment underneath with the thoughts that you have about this conversation and you know what what got you more curious? What would you like to hear more about? Where were you angry? Where were you, all the feelings? Because I really love being able to engage with those things too. I know sometimes conversations that are hard to have because they are difficult for people in lots of ways. And instead of just ignoring the critics, I want to hear what they really have to say and hear how it's landing for people. So I appreciate those kinds of comments as well.
So do I. So, yes, let's know. Let us know.
All right.
So,
Thank you,
thank you.
Dina.
Bye.
Bye.